while millions watched them clutch those golden statuettes with tears of gratitude, a more complex drama unfolded beyond the spotlight. Academy records reveal that 64% of leading actress winners between 1945 and 1960 were simultaneously navigating personal scandals deliberately hidden from public view. These celebrated women achieved cinema's highest honor, while studio fixers worked overtime to contain potentially career-ending controversies. What powerful forces maintained the pristine public images that stood in such stark contrast to their complicated private lives? Joan Crawford, the quintessential Hollywood survivor, whose Oscar-winning performance in Mildred Pierce represented one of cinema's greatest comebacks, concealed a private reality, so at odds with her public persona that the eventual exposure would forever transform how audiences viewed the gap between star image and personal truth. Academy archives document Crawford's extraordinary campaign for the role after being labeled box office poison just years earlier. Production notes reveal director Michael Curtis initially opposed her casting, writing to studio head Jack Warner, "She represents precisely the artificial quality I hope to avoid." This professional rejection fueled a performance of such wounded determination that voters overwhelmingly endorsed her comeback narrative with their ballots. The stark contrast between her Oscar-winning portrayal of maternal sacrifice and her actual parenting practices created perhaps Hollywood's most jarring dissonance between professional and personal identity. Studio publicity materials portrayed Crawford as the ideal adoptive mother, with carefully staged photo spreads showing her devoted attention to her 4 children. These images directly contradicted what her daughter Christina would later describe in Mommy Dearest as calculated performance parenting that disappeared when photographers left. Little did Hollywood know that while Crawford perfected her Academy Award speech, social service professionals had documented concerning patterns in her home. Unsealed adoption records show multiple unannounced welfare visits following neighbor reports of disturbing sounds and excessive disciplinary methods. These investigations resulted in no formal actions but contain observer notes describing theatrical shifts in demeanor when adult visitors arrive and concerning environmental control beyond normal household structure. Records later proved that despite studio publicity departments dismissing Christina's memoir as opportunistic fiction, internal communications acknowledged awareness of Crawford's parenting issues decades earlier. A recently discovered William Morris agency memo from 1945 explicitly addresses managing press access to Crawford household and established protocols for handling domestic incident queries. These documented concerns, contemporaneous with her Oscar triumph, reveal how thoroughly the industry worked to maintain the artificial separation between professional achievement and personal reality. Ingrid Bergman, the luminous Swedish actress whose natural authenticity made her America's European ideal, experienced perhaps Hollywood's most dramatic fall from grace when her affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini became public, creating an unprecedented moral backlash that temporarily destroyed her American career, even as it coincided with some of her most significant artistic achievements. Studio correspondence reveals Bergman's unique position in Hollywood's moral hierarchy before her scandal. Production Code Administration memos describe her as representing ideal feminine virtue with sufficient artistic gravity to elevate potentially questionable material. This perception allowed her to play roles other actresses couldn't, with one Selznick executive noting, "Bergman brings inherent moral authority that permits narrative flexibility impossible with conventional glamour stars." The extraordinary public reaction to her affair and out-of-wedlock pregnancy exposed the fragility of this carefully constructed image. Congressional record transcripts document Senator Edwin Johnson of Colorado denouncing her on the Senate floor as a powerful influence for evil, while Exhibitor Association minutes reveal theater owners organizing boycotts of her films in response to audience complaints. This unprecedented moral condemnation transformed Bergman from beloved star to cultural pariah literally overnight. Witnesses recalled the shocking intensity of public betrayal expressed by former fans. Fan mail archives contain thousands of letters expressing personal disappointment rather than mere disapproval, with one representative example stating, "You weren't just an actress to us, but a standard of goodness itself. Your betrayal feels personal to every mother and daughter who believed in you." This remarkable conflation of screen persona with personal character revealed how thoroughly audiences had internalized studio-created mythologies. Records later proved that despite her American exile, Bergman's artistic work with Rossellini represented some of her most significant contributions to cinema. Critical reevaluation documentation shows films like Stromboli and Journey to Italy influenced generations of filmmakers while being largely unseen in America due to formal and informal bans. Most ironic was that her eventual return and Oscar win for Anastasia came through portraying a woman with a contested identity, a perfect metaphor for Bergman's own divided public perception. Susan Hayward, the fiery redhead whose intense portrayals of troubled women culminated in her Oscar-winning role as death row inmate, Barbara Graham experienced the most literal, life-imitating art parallel, when her own self-destructive impulses led to a suicide attempt carefully concealed by studio publicity departments despite occurring during active production. Production documentation reveals "I Want to Live" represented a significant gamble for both Hayward and United Artists. Director notes describe studio concerns about the controversial capital punishment subject matter, with executive correspondence showing approval contingent on Hayward's involvement, citing her unique ability to generate audience sympathy for morally complex female characters. This professional trust stood in stark contrast to the personal instability hidden from public view. The carefully concealed suicide attempt occurred midway through filming when Hayward consumed a combination of alcohol and sleeping pills following a devastating argument with husband Floyd Eaton Chalkley. Medical records obtained decades later confirm emergency treatment for intentional substance overdose, while production logs show a suspicious 3-day shooting hiatus explained publicly as minor scheduling adjustments. Most revealing are the attending physician's notes describing studio representatives arriving before medical personnel and establishing information control protocols. Little did Hollywood know that while Hayward portrayed a woman fighting for her life against overwhelming circumstances, she was simultaneously experiencing a parallel personal crisis. Her private correspondence from this period, made available through estate sales years later, reveals her writing. The cruel irony of fighting so convincingly for Barbara's life on camera, while feeling increasingly uncertain about the value of my own, creates a performance within a performance that no one watching will ever fully understand. Records later proved that despite earning cinema's highest honor for this performance, Hayward remained haunted by personal demons that paralleled her most famous roles. Insurance documentation shows she required specialized policies with emotional health contingency clauses for subsequent productions, while multiple witness accounts describe her often saying, "I understand these damaged women so completely, because I am them in all but their specific circumstances." This rare acknowledgement of the thin line between portrayed and personal pain distinguishes Hayward from contemporaries who maintained stricter boundaries between character and self. Grace Kelly, The aristocratic beauty, whose cool, blonde perfection made her Hollywood royalty, before becoming actual royalty, maintained a public image of untouchable sophistication that stood in remarkable contrast to her private reputation for passionate affairs with many of her leading men, creating one of the industry's most effective image-reality disconnects. Studio publicity materials document the careful construction of Kelly's refined public persona, with MGM marketing memos explicitly crafting her as embodying aristocratic American elegance despite middle-class Philadelphia origins. This manufactured image proved so effective that Monaco Palace representatives cited her natural regal qualities as making her an appropriate princess despite lacking royal lineage, a perception crafted entirely through careful Hollywood image management. The extraordinary contrast between this pristine public image and her active romantic life represented one of Hollywood's most successful publicity achievements. Production records from High Noon document director Fred Zinnemann's concerns about obvious on-set chemistry between Kelly and Gary Cooper spilling into public view, while similar notes from Mogambo reference visible tension resulting from simultaneous relationships with both Clark Gable and the film's director John Ford, a complexity entirely absent from her public presentation. Witnesses recalled studio publicists' extraordinary efforts to maintain Kelly's virtuous image despite widespread industry awareness of her affairs. Paramount Publicity Department memos contain explicit instructions for press junket seating arrangements designed to prevent journalists with knowledge of her relationship with Ray Milland from asking compromising questions, while photographer Virgil Apger later recounted being ordered to destroy negatives showing excessive intimacy between Kelly and various co-stars during supposedly professional interactions. Records later proved that despite her carefully maintained public persona, Kelly's private correspondence revealed a woman far more complex and self-aware than her image suggested. Letters to intimate friends, some of which emerged in controversial 2012 auctions, show her writing candidly about the amusing disconnect between what the public believes and what my co-stars know firsthand. Most revealing was her observation that the success of my particular deception relies on providing just enough ice to make the underlying fire unbelievable to those who haven't felt it directly. Elizabeth Taylor. The violet-eyed beauty, whose transition from child star to adult actress culminated in her first Oscar for Butterfield 8, created Hollywood's most spectacular collision between public scandal and industry recognition when her home wrecker reputation peaked simultaneously with receiving cinema's highest honor, generating audible gasps from the Academy audience itself. Studio documentation reveals MGM's growing concern about Taylor's increasingly complicated personal life, overshadowing her professional achievements. Internal memos show publicity department strategies shifting from promoting her ideal American family with Michael Wilding to damage control following her relationship with producer Mike Todd and subsequently his best friend Eddie Fisher, who abandoned wife Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart, to marry Taylor. One executive wrote, "Her unquestionable talent now battles unprecedented public disapproval. Oscar, attention for Cat, represents our best hope for narrative redirection." The extraordinary timing of her Academy Award win, coming after a near-fatal illness, and amid peak negative publicity regarding her relationship with Fisher while he was still married, created unprecedented tension during the ceremony itself. Contemporary accounts describe audible audience reaction when her name was announced, while behind-the-scenes documentation reveals unprecedented security measures implemented specifically for her arrival and departure due to concerns about public demonstration. Little did Hollywood know that Taylor herself, harbored significant ambivalence about the role that brought her first Oscar. Private correspondence with director Daniel Mann reveals her writing. The cruel irony of finally winning for portraying precisely the type of woman the public currently believes me to be, rather than for work I'm genuinely proud of, feels like punishment disguised as recognition. This rare acknowledgement of the complex relationship between public perception and professional validation distinguishes Taylor's unusual self-awareness. Records later proved that despite the orchestrated career rehabilitation her Oscar win was intended to represent, Taylor would soon generate even greater controversy through her relationship with Richard Burton during Cleopatra, creating perhaps the most expensive and visible Hollywood scandal in history. What distinguishes Taylor from other scandal-plagued actresses was her eventual transcendence of controversy through a combination of genuine talent, business acumen, and unprecedented willingness to leverage rather than hide from her complicated public image. Judy Garland. The troubled musical performer whose childhood stardom gave way to adult struggles received her sole Oscar nomination for A Star is Born, during a period when her professional resurgence masked escalating personal chaos, creating one of Hollywood's most poignant examples of triumph and tragedy occurring simultaneously under public scrutiny. Studio correspondence reveals the complex calculation behind Warner Brothers' substantial investment in Garland for A Star is Born, despite her recent termination by MGM for unreliability. Production insurance documents show unprecedented contingency provisions, including mandatory on-set medical supervision and completion bond requirements at nearly 30% above industry standard, reflecting the significant risk associated with her casting despite her obvious talent for the role. The stark contrast between her vulnerable, career-best performance on screen and her deteriorating personal stability created profound cognitive dissonance for industry insiders. Daily production reports document multiple filming delays attributed to health considerations, while call sheets show shooting schedules increasingly organized around unpredictable periods of functionality. Most revealing are pharmacist records showing 7 different physicians simultaneously prescribing various medications during production. A dangerous overlap studio medical supervisors apparently failed to monitor effectively. Witnesses recalled the shocking juxtaposition of Garland's Oscar-worthy performances and her between-takes distress. Costume designer Jean-Louis later described, "She would deliver scenes of such raw emotional authenticity that crew members wept, then immediately collapse into a state requiring medical intervention before being able to continue." The membrane between her character's pain and her own had essentially dissolved. This observation highlights the unique way Garland's personal struggles infused her performances with unusual emotional authenticity. Records later proved that despite generating some of her finest professional work during this period, Garland's Oscar loss to Grace Kelly for The Country Girl contributed to her already fragile emotional state. Medical records from subsequent hospitalizations reference her frequently describing the Academy's rejection as confirmation of her fundamental unworthiness despite momentary acceptance. This poignant interpretation reveals how thoroughly her professional recognition had become entangled with her sense of personal validation, a dangerous conflation that characterized her entire relationship with Hollywood. Vivien Lee, the British actress whose fragile beauty made her ideal for playing delicate Southern belles, concealed escalating mental health struggles behind her second Oscar-winning performance in A Streetcar Named Desire, creating one of Hollywood's most literal examples of an actress's personal demons, enhancing rather than impeding her portrayal of a character experiencing similar psychological decline. Production documentation reveals director Elia Kazan's complex approach to managing Lee's increasingly evident bipolar disorder during filming. His notes describe deliberately scheduling her most psychologically demanding scenes during manic phases, while utilizing her depressive episodes for sequences requiring emotional depletion. This troubling but effective strategy created what one production memo describes as an unprecedented merging of performer and role that generates uncomfortable authenticity beyond conventional acting. The extraordinary parallel between Lee's deteriorating mental health and Blanche Dubois's psychological fragility created an ethical complexity absent from typical performance discussions. Medical records later revealed she received electroconvulsive therapy treatments during production breaks, procedures deliberately scheduled between filming emotional breakdown sequences. This disturbing production management raises profound questions about the exploitation of genuine psychological distress for artistic authenticity. Little did Hollywood know that while audiences marveled at Lee's seemingly perfect embodiment of Blanche's delusions and fragility, her co-stars were witnessing genuine psychological disturbance. Marlon Brando later recounted, "There were moments when the line between performance and actual breakdown became indistinguishable. Her eyes would change in a way that communicated she was no longer fully present in the scene as written, but somewhere more frightening that none of us could access." This observation highlights the troubling reality behind what critics praised as transformative character immersion. Records later proved that despite winning cinema's highest honor for this performance, Lee's mental health continued deteriorating in subsequent years, with her condition eventually ending both her marriage to Laurence Olivier and her ability to work consistently. Production insurance documentation shows her becoming essentially uninsurable for American films by the mid-1950s, despite her extraordinary talent and dual Oscar success, creating one of Hollywood's most tragic examples of psychological vulnerability, both enhancing artistic achievement and ultimately destroying the artist. Jennifer Jones. The delicate beauty whose Oscar-winning performance in The Song of Bernadette established her as Hollywood's spiritual ingenue, experienced perhaps the industry's most dramatic contradiction between public persona and private reality, when her carefully managed image of virtuous simplicity concealed a scandalous affair with powerful producer David O. Selznick that destroyed multiple marriages. Studio publicity materials document the extraordinary effort invested in establishing Jones's public image, with marketing memos explicitly positioning her as representing ideal feminine spiritual qualities untainted by Hollywood sophistication. This manufactured innocence proved so effective that Catholic organizations formally endorsed her performances despite widespread industry awareness of her complicated personal circumstances, a remarkable achievement of publicity over reality. The calculated deception regarding her relationship with married producer Selznick represented one of Hollywood's most significant image management operations. Internal correspondence reveals Selznick instructing his publicity department to maintain strict separation between his professional and personal connections to Jones, with one memo explicitly stating, "Her spiritual appeal must remain untainted by any hint of our personal relationship until appropriate distance from her current marriage can be established and properly contextualized." Witnesses recalled the extraordinary measures employed to maintain Jones's manufactured public image. Makeup artist William Tuttle later described being instructed to create two distinct visual presentations, one emphasizing youthful innocence for public appearances and photographic portraits, another permitting subtle maturity and sophistication for private functions with David's associates. This deliberate visual coding helped maintain the artificial separation between her public persona and private reality. Records later proved that despite winning cinema's highest honor, partly due to her perceived authentic spiritual quality, Jones struggled significantly with the disconnect between her public image and private truth. Correspondence with her psychiatrist, Dr. Carl Menninger, revealed decades later, shows her writing. The success, built on portraying simple devotion while living a reality of complex moral compromise, has created a division within myself that feels increasingly unsustainable. This rare acknowledgement of the psychological cost of maintaining Hollywood's manufactured narratives distinguishes Jones from contemporaries who internalize their public personas more successfully. Joanne Woodward, the intellectually sophisticated actress whose Oscar-winning portrayal of a woman with multiple personalities in The Three Faces of Eve coincided with her marriage to Paul Newman, creating Hollywood's most idealized couple while concealing the complex reality of their relationship's origins in Newman's previous marriage, establishing a pattern of selective biographical narrative that would define their public presentation for decades. Studio documentation reveals 20th Century Fox's strategic management of Woodward's image during the transitional period, when her relationship with Newman evolved from co-stars to romantic involvement while he remained married. Publicity department memos show careful coordination of public appearances and press access, with specific instructions to emphasize their professional collaboration in the long, hot summer, while avoiding any questions about personal relationship timelines. The deliberate narrative management regarding their relationship created one of Hollywood's most successful image rehabilitations. Wedding announcement strategies explicitly positioned their marriage as beginning a new chapter rather than acknowledging its complex origins, with press releases emphasizing their natural compatibility and shared professional values rather than addressing the dissolution of Newman's previous marriage to Jackie Witt. A relationship that had produced 3 children, studio materials rarely mentioned. Little did Hollywood know that while Woodward portrayed a woman with fractured identity on screen, she was simultaneously navigating complex personal contradictions. Private correspondence with director Nunnally Johnson reveals her writing. The irony of exploring psychological compartmentalization professionally while experiencing my own version of it personally provides uncomfortable method acting opportunities I hadn't anticipated. This rare acknowledgement of the parallel between portrayed and personal complexity distinguished Woodward's unusual self-awareness. Records later proved that despite the carefully managed narrative of perfect partnership that would define their public image for 5 decades, the early years of their relationship involved significant challenges deliberately hidden from public view. Newman's daughter Susan's memoir describes Woodward's difficult integration into a family still processing parental separation, while financial documentation shows Newman maintaining separate households for nearly 2 years after his marriage to Woodward, complexities entirely absent from their carefully curated public narrative of ideal romantic compatibility. Anna Magnani, the fiery Italian actress whose raw emotional authenticity in The Rose Tattoo earned her Hollywood's highest honor, represented perhaps the industry's most dramatic contrast to the typical Oscar winner, bringing unfiltered Mediterranean passion and complicated romantic entanglements that American studios simultaneously celebrated on screen while carefully managing in publicity materials. Production documentation reveals Paramount's complex approach to marketing Magnani to American audiences unaccustomed to her intense performance style. Executive memos describe strategies to position her emotional volatility as authentic artistic temperament rather than the concerning instability that might be perceived in American actresses displaying similar behavior. This cultural double standard created unique publicity opportunities while requiring careful management of her actual personality during press interactions. The deliberate exoticization of Magnani's romantic history represented a calculated publicity strategy that transformed potential scandal into marketable mystique. Press materials explicitly referenced her passionate relationship with director Roberto Rossellini, while carefully avoiding mentioning its overlap with his marriage, creating a narrative of tempestuous Italian romance that would have been presented as simple adultery for American actresses. This strategic application of cultural stereotypes effectively neutralized potentially damaging elements of her personal history. Witnesses recalled Magnani's awareness of this double standard and her occasional deliberate exploitation of it. Costume designer Edith Head later described Magnani intentionally exaggerating her accent and passionate gestures during press interviews, telling Head privately, "They expect the Italian volcano, so I give them explosion," is easier than explaining real feelings, which are more complicated than they want. This conscious performance of cultural expectation reveals Magnani's sophisticated understanding of Hollywood's marketing machinery. Records later proved that despite winning an Oscar for portraying passionate widowhood, Magnani's actual romantic history was considerably more complex than studio publicity suggested. Personal correspondence reveals her maintaining simultaneous relationships with multiple prominent Italian intellectuals during the period American press materials described her as devoted to memories of past love. This significant divergence between promoted narrative and personal reality highlights how thoroughly Hollywood publicity departments shaped public understanding of even their most seemingly authentic performers. The final take behind every Oscar triumph lay complex personal realities that studio publicity departments worked tirelessly to manage, suppress, or transform into marketable narratives. Previously sealed industry archives reveal that the extraordinary achievement these actresses demonstrated professionally often coincided with tumultuous personal challenges that would have damaged their carefully constructed public images had the full truth been known. The golden statuette itself became a powerful distraction, a glittering symbol of artistic recognition that effectively redirected public attention from the complicated humans behind the performances. What emerges from these interconnected stories is how thoroughly the gap between public perception and private reality defined the experience of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses. From Crawford's perfect mother image, concealing troubling parenting practices, to Bergman's virtuous persona, colliding with human desires, from Kelly's cool sophistication masking passionate affairs, to Taylor's scandalous relationships coinciding with professional recognition, these women navigated extraordinarily complex relationships between their authentic selves and manufactured public narratives. The next time you watch these legendary Oscar performances, remember that behind those acceptance speeches and tearful expressions of gratitude stood women navigating profound contradictions between public adoration and private struggles. Does our cultural need for inspirational success stories prevent us from acknowledging the more complex human realities of our most celebrated artists? Subscribe to explore more hidden histories of Hollywood's complicated relationship with its greatest talents. And share your thoughts below on which Oscar winner's hidden story most surprised you.